The sun rose over the vast stretches of golden grass and rolling hills, casting a warm glow over the small ranch that sat quietly on the outskirts of a sleepy town. The birds sang softly, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of hay and wildflowers. It was a peaceful morning, the kind that made the world seem simple and calm. On this ranch lived a woman whose presence was as quiet and steady as the land itself. She moved with a gentle grace, tending to her animals with patience and care. To anyone passing by, she was just an elderly woman living alone, content with the quiet rhythm of her life. She had a small herd of cows that grazed peacefully in the fields, a few chickens clucking around the yard, and a couple of horses that nickered softly when she approached. She moved among them with ease, feeding, brushing, and checking each one for any sign of discomfort. Her hands, though lined with age, were strong and sure. They had carried her through many years, through work that demanded precision and care. She hummed a soft tune as she worked, a melody she had carried in her heart for decades. The ranch was her sanctuary, a place where the memories of a past life were tucked away behind the fences and barns, hidden from the world. Though she appeared fragile to the casual observer, there was a strength about her that could not be measured by age or appearance. Her eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to take in everything at once. The slightest movement, the softest sound, the tiniest detail that others might miss. She had learned long ago that the world was rarely as simple as it seemed. There were dangers that could appear without warning, and while she hoped never to confront them again, she remained ready. She had trained for years, had faced challenges that would have broken most people, and had survived. But those days were behind her now, or so she thought. She lived quietly, drawing little attention to herself. Her neighbors knew her as the kind woman who would lend a helping hand when needed, who would smile and wave when someone passed by. Children would often watch her from a distance, fascinated by the way she could move so quickly and gracefully despite her age. There were whispers among the townsfolk about her past, rumors that she had been someone important, someone brave, but no one really knew the truth. She never spoke of her history. She didn't need recognition or praise. She had done her part in the world long ago, and now she simply wanted peace. Mornings were her favorite time of day. She would start by checking the water troughs, making sure each animal had plenty to drink. Then she would move to the barn, where the smell of hay and straw mingled with the earthy scent of the animals. She could still lift heavy bales of hay with ease, stacking them neatly as she moved with a practiced rhythm. Her muscles remembered what her mind sometimes tried to forget, that she was strong, capable, and precise. Even as the years passed, she refused to let age slow her down more than necessary. She exercised daily, keeping her body ready for any challenge, though she hoped none would come. She often worked alone, but not because she wanted to. Most people assumed she preferred solitude, but the truth was more complicated. She had learned to rely on herself, to trust her instincts above all else. In her younger years, she had worked with teams, sometimes in life-and-death situations where mistakes were not allowed. Those experiences had taught her that relying on others could be dangerous. She didn't expect anyone to understand that now, in this quiet life, she still carried the lessons of the past with her. She carried them silently, like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. The town itself was quiet and unremarkable, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. Shops opened in the morning with the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifting into the streets. Children ran to school, laughing and shouting, their voices carrying through the cool morning air. Neighbors greeted each other with nods and smiles, exchanging news or the occasional story. It was a world of routine, a world of safety, or so it seemed. But the ranch stood a little apart from it all, nestled in the open fields where the roads faded into dirt and gravel. It was a place where the past could be kept hidden, where secrets could live safely. She had her routines, small rituals that kept the day steady. She would start with the animals, move to the garden where she grew vegetables and herbs, and then return to the house to prepare a simple breakfast. She liked to eat slowly, savoring each bite, listening to the sounds of the ranch. The wind in the trees, the distant crow of a rooster, the soft lowing of the cows, all of it grounded her, reminded her that life could be beautiful and quiet if one allowed it. She liked to sit by the window, looking out at the hills, thinking about the people she had met, the places she had been, and the things she had done. Sometimes memories would slip into her mind uninvited, images of distant lands, missions that had tested her in ways that seemed unimaginable. She remembered the weight of a rifle in her hands, the tense silence before a mission, the thrill of precision, the fear of failure. Those days were over, but they were never truly gone. They lived in her bones, in the way she moved, in the sharpness of her gaze. She had learned to compartmentalize, to keep the past where it belonged, but it had shaped her completely. Anyone who had underestimated her in those days had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. The ranch was more than a home. It was a sanctuary built with her own hands. The fences were strong, the barns sturdy, the fields well kept. She had learned patience here, patience with the earth, with animals, with herself. She understood that growth took time, that things needed to be nurtured to thrive. She treated her animals with respect, each one knowing her voice, her touch, the way she moved. They responded to her care, trusting her instinctively. There was a harmony here that she cherished, a balance between strength and gentleness that she had fought to maintain all her life. Evenings were quiet, filled with the soft glow of the setting sun. She would sit on the porch sipping tea, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Sometimes she would hear the distant howl of a coyote or the rustle of a deer moving through the fields. These sounds reminded her that the world was alive, that there were things beyond the ranch, beyond the town, beyond her control. She accepted that. She had learned long ago that not everything could be managed, but she could manage herself. That knowledge brought her peace, even in a world that could be unpredictable and cruel. And yet deep down she knew that peace could be fragile. She had seen too much, survived too much to be naive. There were people in the world who sought power through fear, who believed they could take what they wanted without consequence. She hoped never to encounter them, hoped that the quiet life she had built would remain untouched. But the instincts that had kept her alive for decades were still there, lying just beneath the surface. She remained watchful, aware, ready for anything, even if she could not yet imagine what that might be. As the night fell, she moved through her home, lighting lamps and checking the doors and windows. She made sure everything was in order, that nothing had been overlooked. The world outside was dark and full of unknowns, but inside her home there was light, warmth, and safety. She went to bed with a sense of calm, though her mind always lingered on the edge, scanning, listening, remembering. In her dreams, she sometimes returned to those far-off missions, feeling the thrill and danger all over again. She woke with the same clarity she had always carried, ready to meet the new day, to care for her ranch, to live quietly in the way she had chosen. The morning would come again, and with it, the routines that defined her life. But something lingered in the air, an unspoken sense that change was on the horizon. She could feel it in the way the wind shifted, in the distant hum of vehicles far off in the road, in the faint sense of movement where none should be. She didn't yet know what it meant, but she trusted her instincts. She had survived because she had always listened, because she had never allowed herself to be caught off guard. Whatever was coming, she would face it with the same quiet strength and calm precision that had carried her through every challenge before. And so, the ranch remained peaceful, the sun shining on the golden fields, the animals moving quietly in their enclosures. The woman moved among them with ease, unaware that her life, once hidden and serene, was about to be touched by a storm that would test every skill, every instinct, every lesson she had learned in a life far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. She was ready, even if she didn't yet know it, because she was more than just an elderly woman on a ranch. She was a survivor, a warrior, and her story was far from over. The ranch had settled into the quiet rhythm of the morning when the first signs of trouble appeared. From a distance, the faint hum of engines reached her ears, almost drowned out by the wind in the trees. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon, noting the dust clouds rising from the dirt road that led to her property. At first, she thought it might be passing trucks or local farmers, but something in the movement of the vehicles set her senses on alert. They were too deliberate, too coordinated, and there were too many of them. By the time they reached the outskirts of her property, the intruders had become visible. Several trucks and SUVs rolled slowly over the uneven terrain, their windows dark and faces obscured. Men stepped out, armed, moving with a confidence that suggested they had never met resistance. They spoke loudly to each other, laughter mixing with the clink of weapons and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. To them, the ranch looked abandoned, easy prey. They saw an elderly woman, perhaps frail, living alone, and they assumed that fear and intimidation would be enough to take control. She watched them carefully from the window of her kitchen, her hands resting lightly on the counter. There was no panic in her movements, no trembling. Her mind ran through calculations, assessing distances, cover points, and the best vantage spots. She could see how they moved, how they communicated, how they underestimated her. Their arrogance was almost tangible, a mistake that would soon become costly. In her younger years, she had faced far deadlier situations, and yet this was different because it was close to home. The stakes were no longer abstract missions on foreign soil. They were her property, her animals, her life. The intruders made their first move, heading toward the barns and pens where her animals grazed. One of them kicked at the fence, laughing, while another aimed a firearm at a chicken that wandered too close. The sound of the weapon being loaded was sharp, a warning of the chaos they intended to bring. She knew that if she didn't act, the animals she had cared for years would suffer. The thought of them in danger ignited a calm, focused determination within her. She didn't panic. She prepared. She moved silently through her house, collecting tools and equipment she had kept for emergencies. There were ropes, simple mechanical traps, and even a few items that seemed ordinary to anyone else but were anything but ordinary in her hands. Every movement was precise, practiced, and purposeful. Her heart did not race. Her mind was clear. She had trained for these moments, had relied on instincts that had been honed over decades. She reminded herself that she didn't need to confront them directly. She only needed to control the situation, to show them that they had underestimated the wrong person. Outside, the men began exploring, entering the barns, kicking at the gates, opening storage sheds. They moved with overconfidence, laughing at each other's jokes and daring each other to take risks. They had assumed that the ranch was deserted, that resistance would be minimal. Each careless step they took was an opportunity for her, a chance to set things in motion that would make them regret every decision that had led them here. She observed quietly, noting patterns, timing movements, and calculating how best to use the terrain to her advantage. A sudden sound of breaking wood caused the intruders to turn their heads. It was subtle, almost like a branch snapping underfoot, but it was enough to make them uneasy for a moment. She smiled faintly, knowing they didn't realize that her calm watchfulness had already put her several steps ahead. She didn't need to confront them physically yet. She could let them make the mistakes. Overconfidence and arrogance were their weaknesses, and she planned to use them fully. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the ranch and highlighting the dust that swirled around the intruders. Their laughter continued, but there were moments when it faltered, when a subtle glance would show a flicker of unease. They had no idea that they were being observed with the eyes of someone who could anticipate their every move. Each of them carried weapons, but none of them carried the experience, the discipline, or the precision that she did. To them, she was just an old woman. To her, they were predictable, and predictability could be exploited. She had prepared her defenses carefully over the years. There were hidden vantage points in the barns, traps in the fields, and paths that led to areas the intruders couldn't easily access. She had mapped it all in her mind, rehearsed responses to multiple scenarios, and waited for this exact kind of moment. Patience was her greatest ally. She didn't need to confront them yet. She only needed to control the flow of events, to let them believe they were in charge until the moment came to shift the balance entirely. The men began spreading out, some moving toward the house, some into the fields, some toward the horse pens. She watched each movement, noting which individuals were reckless, which were cautious, and which relied entirely on their guns rather than their brains. She remembered long nights of surveillance in her past life, the tension of waiting for the exact right moment to act. It was a skill that had kept her alive in situations far more dangerous than this, and now on her own land it would serve her once more. As the morning stretched into afternoon, she began taking subtle actions to unsettle them. A gate would swing open unexpectedly. A small object would roll into their path. A noise would come from the barn roof. Each action was deliberate, each small disturbance designed to create doubt and hesitation. The intruders laughed nervously at first, thinking it was coincidence. By the third incident, they were exchanging wary glances, realizing that their easy target might not be so easy after all. She moved closer to her vantage points, her mind fully focused. She checked her equipment, ensuring everything was in place. A rope here, a tripwire there, a simple but effective setup that could slow them down or disorient them if necessary. Her hands moved with precision, no motion wasted. She could still feel the thrill of anticipation, the clarity that came with knowing she had the advantage. She didn't hate these men. She didn't even fear them. She respected the challenge, the opportunity to demonstrate skill and control, and she would do so quietly, efficiently, and without unnecessary violence if possible. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the tension in the air grew thick. The intruders had begun to notice that things were not as simple as they seemed. Small signs, subtle but unmistakable, hinted at the woman's presence, her awareness, and her readiness. They couldn't see her, but they could feel it. The invisible hand guiding events, the sense that they were no longer fully in control. Panic had not set in yet, but unease had begun to seep into their confidence. They spoke in hushed tones now, their earlier laughter gone, replaced with quick, nervous gestures and whispered words. She continued observing, ready to escalate when the time was right. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Each moment passed, each small mistake they made, and she cataloged it, stored it in her mind. She remembered every detail, the way one man favored his right side, the way another relied too heavily on his gun, the way the group as a whole moved without coordination. Every observation would become an advantage when the moment came to act decisively. Nightfall approached, casting long shadows across the ranch. The intruders began to settle into temporary positions, preparing for an evening they assumed would be uneventful. She allowed them this illusion, this false sense of security. She had learned that arrogance and overconfidence were the fastest routes to failure, and she planned to exploit them fully. From her hidden vantage points, she could see them, hear them, and understand them better than they understood themselves. As darkness fell, the ranch became a place of quiet anticipation. She moved silently, checking the perimeter, adjusting her equipment, ensuring that every path, every line of sight, every possible approach was accounted for. The intruders thought they had chosen an easy target, but she knew otherwise. She had lived a life where mistakes were fatal, and she intended to make sure that any who crossed her path learned the same lesson in their own way. For hours she waited, unseen and undisturbed. The night settled over the ranch, the stars blinking softly in the sky. Her mind was calm, focused, and ready. She knew that the intruders had underestimated her completely, and she allowed that knowledge to settle like a quiet fire within her. The storm would come, but it would come on her terms, precise, controlled, and devastating in its efficiency. They would learn too late that the woman they thought weak and frail was a force to be reckoned with, a warrior whose past life had prepared her for moments exactly like this. And so the ranch remained outwardly peaceful, the intruders unaware that their presence had already triggered a sequence of events they could not hope to control. They had come expecting an easy victory, a simple conquest, but the world had already shifted beneath their feet. The woman moved quietly, watching, waiting, preparing, knowing that when the time came she would act with the precision, skill, and calm that had defined her entire life. The morning light crept over the hills again, but the ranch was no longer the quiet sanctuary it had been. The intruders had spread across the property, believing they had full control. They moved with cautious confidence, thinking the woman inside was too old, too weak, too ordinary to pose any real threat. They didn't know her. They had no idea what lived in the mind and body of someone who had spent decades mastering survival, patience, and precision. She had watched them carefully as they settled into the barn, the horse pens, and the fields. She had counted every weapon, memorized their positions, and noted the rhythm of their movements. From her vantage point in the trees at the edge of the property, she could see everything. The way one man leaned too heavily on his rifle, the way another ignored the sounds around him. Their arrogance was palpable, and she intended to use it against them. She moved quietly, slipping from her house to the barn roof, where she could survey the area more fully. The animals were safe for now, but she knew it wouldn't last if she didn't act. She didn't feel anger toward these men, only a calm resolve. She had faced dangers far worse than this, missions where lives were on the line every second. She remembered those nights clearly, the tension in the air, the weight of responsibility pressing down, the need for absolute focus. Every lesson she had learned would guide her now. She began setting small traps, not to harm them severely, but to disorient and confuse. A loose plank here, a tripwire there, a rock strategically placed in a path they were sure was clear. Each minor obstacle made them hesitate, forced them to second-guess themselves. She didn't make noise. She didn't reveal her presence. Instead, she let their own overconfidence work against them. They had walked into her world, and she had already turned it to her advantage. The men began to notice that something was wrong. Footsteps seemed louder than they should be. Shadows moved in impossible directions, and the occasional clatter of an object falling without cause made them uneasy. They whispered to each other, questioning whether the ranch was really as empty as they had thought. One of them even suggested leaving, but the others scoffed at the idea. They laughed nervously, trying to convince themselves that their target was still an easy mark. They didn't know that the woman they had underestimated was already 2 steps ahead. She remembered the old training drills, the nights of preparing for ambushes, the hours spent memorizing terrain and learning to move unseen. Every memory, every skill was a tool she could use now. She didn't need to fight them all at once. She only needed to control the pace, to manipulate their perception, to make them question their safety at every turn. Patience had always been her greatest weapon. Even in the deadliest of conflicts, rushing had always led to mistakes. She would not make those mistakes now. As the day wore on, she watched them grow careless. Confidence began to slip into recklessness. One man approached the horse pen without checking his surroundings. Another leaned against the barn wall, unaware that she had loosened a support beam just enough to create an unstable platform. Each minor action was calculated, each opportunity noted. She didn't act violently yet. She allowed them to make the mistakes for her, confident that when the time came she could act swiftly and decisively. She also began to use her knowledge of their psychology against them. She had learned long ago that fear, doubt, and uncertainty could unbalance even the strongest opponents. A subtle shadow here, a noise there, a glance in the wrong direction. Each was enough to make them question what they had assumed was simple. She moved silently from vantage point to vantage point, observing their reactions and adjusting her tactics. They were predictable because they assumed she would act as anyone ordinary would, but she was far from ordinary. By late afternoon, the intruders had begun to split up, moving into different areas of the ranch. She had anticipated this and had prepared multiple paths for observation and escape. She could see them in pairs or small groups, making them easier to manage. Her mind mapped the terrain as it had thousands of times before, calculating lines of sight, potential ambush points, and escape routes. She didn't panic. She didn't hesitate. She moved with a calm certainty, knowing that control was hers as long as she remained patient and precise. She recalled missions in her past where patience had saved lives, long hours of waiting, watching, calculating every possible outcome, and then acting in the exact right moment. That discipline was ingrained in her, part of her very being. The men outside, armed and confident, had no idea they were being observed by someone who had lived a life of precision and strategy. They believed their numbers and firepower gave them advantage. But they had forgotten one thing. Skill and experience often outweighed quantity. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Shadows stretched long across the fields, making some areas impossible to see clearly. She used the changing light to her advantage, shifting her position to remain concealed. The men began to feel it, the creeping sense that something was wrong. One of them muttered under his breath about hearing footsteps that didn't belong to anyone. Another tightened his grip on his rifle, scanning the fields nervously. The illusion of control they had carried with them since arriving was slipping, and she could see it in every subtle gesture, every fleeting glance. She continued to prepare. Using her knowledge of the land and her instincts honed over decades, she set up simple but effective defenses. She didn't want to hurt anyone unnecessarily, but she needed them off balance. A gate would swing open unexpectedly. A noise would echo from the barn, or a shadow would appear briefly in their peripheral vision. Each small action fed their growing unease. They began to whisper to one another, their earlier laughter gone, replaced with suspicion and tension. The ranch was no longer a place of quiet. It was a field of psychological warfare. Even as she worked, she thought of the animals she had cared for all her life. They were innocent in this conflict, and she would protect them at all costs. Her past had taught her the value of life, of precision, of minimizing unnecessary harm. Every action she planned now considered not only the intruders, but also the safety of those who could not defend themselves. That instinct, cultivated over decades, guided her every decision. The intruders, unaware of her presence, began to make small mistakes. One tripped over a loose plank, another brushed against a hidden wire, startling a horse that whinnied loudly. Panic hadn't set in yet, but doubt was beginning to take root. They whispered nervously, questioning whether they had underestimated the ranch or its owner. Little did they know, their underestimation would become the reason for their downfall. As night fell completely, the ranch grew quiet once more, but the tension remained thick. She moved through the shadows with ease, checking her equipment, adjusting her traps, and observing every move of the intruders. The land, the buildings, the animals, all were under her careful watch. She had anticipated every scenario, prepared for every eventuality, and now the moment to act would come at the exact right time. She did not rush. She had learned long ago that timing was everything, that a single misstep could be fatal. She would wait until the moment was perfect. In her mind, she reviewed the intruders' positions, their likely reactions, and the sequence of actions that would give her the advantage. Her body, though aged, moved with the memory of strength and skill. She could feel the precision in her movements, the calm certainty in her decisions. She was no longer an ordinary woman. She was a strategist, a protector, a force to be reckoned with. The ranch was her domain, and she would defend it with every skill she possessed. By the end of the night, the intruders were fully aware that something was wrong. Their confidence had been chipped away, replaced with suspicion and unease. They didn't know what they faced, but they could feel the invisible pressure of someone watching, someone calculating, someone ready. And in the darkness, she prepared for the coming hours, knowing that soon the intruders would realize the full extent of their mistake. They had underestimated the wrong woman, and the consequences would be theirs alone to bear. The morning air was thick with tension when the first real signs of action began. The intruders, unaware of the full extent of the woman's skill, moved carelessly, still believing that the ranch was an easy target. They had split up, wandering into the fields and barns, their focus divided. She had waited patiently, watching them make mistakes, and now the time had come to act. Every step she had taken over the past day, every trap, every observation, every adjustment was about to pay off. She moved silently, her feet barely making a sound against the earth. The sun had risen high, casting long shadows across the property. From a hidden vantage point, she could see the intruders clearly, their positions, their movements, even the nervous flicker of their eyes. They had become sloppy, their confidence replaced with uncertainty. That was all she needed. One misstep, one hesitation, and she could take control. She didn't need to confront them all at once. She only needed to disrupt their coordination, to make them vulnerable to the environment she had prepared. The first incident was subtle, but effective. A rope she had secured earlier shifted slightly, causing one of the men to trip as he ran toward the barn. He stumbled into a pile of crates, sending wood splintering across the floor. The sound echoed through the air, and the others froze. Fear had begun to seep into their confidence. They looked around, unsure of what had caused it, their voices now quieter, more uncertain.
She watched, her eyes calm and steady.
Every movement she had made was deliberate, every calculation precise. She didn't panic. She controlled the scene like a conductor guiding an orchestra. She moved to a higher vantage, her movements practiced and quiet. From there, she could see more of the property, including the fields where several men had approached the horse pens. A subtle shift of a gate, a carefully loosened board, caused another man to stumble and fall. Panic had not fully set in yet, but doubt and hesitation had begun to replace confidence. They were walking into chaos they could not understand, a world where their assumptions no longer applied. And she remained unseen, a shadow among shadows, a calm force ready to strike at the perfect moment. One of the men tried to organize the group, barking orders and pointing directions. But the more he tried, the more mistakes his team made. Another stumbled over a tripwire, startling a horse that whinnied loudly, and the sound ricocheted across the fields. The group's coordination collapsed bit by bit, each member now wary of their surroundings. She didn't need to confront them directly yet. She only needed to manipulate their perception, to turn their overconfidence into fear, and to guide them toward the mistakes that would give her the upper hand. Her past experiences flashed through her mind. Long missions where patience and observation had been the key to survival. Nights spent waiting for the perfect moment to act. All of that knowledge, all of that skill was now serving her here at her ranch. The intruders, armed and numerous though they were, could not match her precision, her calm, her awareness. They had underestimated her completely, and that miscalculation would cost them dearly. She didn't feel anger, only focus. The world had a way of testing those who were unprepared, and she was determined that she would not be tested unprepared. The afternoon wore on, and she began to escalate her tactics. A crate toppled in one barn, startling a man who stumbled into another, creating a chain reaction that left two more scrambling for balance. In another part of the property, a gate swung open unexpectedly, causing a man to lose his footing and fall. Chaos spread quietly, subtly, without anyone yet realizing the orchestrator of events. The intruders had assumed control, but in reality, they were trapped in the careful, methodical web she had set for them. She kept her distance, observing their reactions and making small adjustments. Each time one of them tried to regroup, she altered something in the environment, shifted a piece of equipment, loosened a board, adjusted a tripwire. Their confidence eroded further. They whispered to each other, tension rising with every misstep. One man even suggested leaving, but pride and stubbornness kept them in place. They did not know that the ranch was already against them, that their presence alone had triggered a response they could neither anticipate nor control. Then came the first clear confrontation. One of the men ventured too close to the main house, where she had set her most precise trap. A simple mechanical setup designed to create a loud noise and knock over a small structure startled him badly. He fell backward, clutching at his weapon, his eyes wide in fear. The others rushed to him, but by the time they approached, they were already off balance. Confusion reigned, and she watched, calm and collected, as her plan unfolded exactly as she had envisioned. From her hidden vantage points, she could see the entire scene. The intruders were no longer moving confidently. They paused, uncertain of their surroundings, of their safety, of each other. Panic began to creep in. A single wrong move now could lead to further mistakes, and she had ensured that any mistake would be costly. Her precision, her patience, her understanding of terrain and timing gave her a distinct advantage. She didn't need brute force. She needed only control, and she had it. She moved closer now, using cover from trees in the barn to approach the field where several men had gathered. A rope she had previously set was now ready to create chaos. With careful timing, she triggered it, causing a small collapse of crates that sent dust and debris into the air. The intruders stumbled again, shouting at each other, trying to regain control. Their confidence was shattered, their sense of security gone. They had expected an easy conquest, but instead, they faced a presence far beyond their imagination. She did not strike directly. She did not need to. Her entire life had been about precision and patience, about waiting for the exact right moment. She allowed the chaos she created to guide them into errors, to weaken their coordination, to break their morale. By mid-afternoon, the intruders were disorganized, fearful, and reactive. Each step they took was tentative, each movement uncertain. She had already won the psychological battle. The physical confrontation was only a matter of timing. From her position, she could see one man attempting to rally the others, shouting orders and pointing directions. His voice was sharp, trying to cut through the tension, but it only highlighted the growing panic in his team. Another tripped over a hidden obstacle, causing a chain reaction that sent two more scrambling to regain balance. She watched, noting each error, each misstep, and storing them for the moment when she would act decisively. She did not rush. She never rushed. The perfect moment would come, and when it did, there would be no question who controlled the ranch. The sun began its descent again, casting shadows across the property. The intruders, exhausted and shaken, tried to regroup. They had begun to realize that they were not dealing with an ordinary woman. Their confidence, once so solid, was now fractured. They spoke quietly, trying to understand what had happened, who had caused these disruptions. They did not know that the calm, elderly woman they had underestimated was the orchestrator of their fear, and that she had planned every moment, every trap, every consequence. With care and precision, she moved among the shadows, checking her lines of defense and adjusting as necessary. Every misstep they had made had been carefully predicted, and she ensured that the chaos would continue. Her mind remained clear, focused, and calm. She was in complete control. The intruders had walked into her world without understanding it, and now they were learning far too late that appearances could be deceiving. Age, gentleness, and quiet could hide a lifetime of skill, experience, and deadly precision. As night approached, she surveyed the entire property. The intruders were disoriented, fearful, and unsure of what to do next. She had created a situation where they could not regain confidence, where each step they took only deepened their uncertainty. Her preparation, Her knowledge and her patience had allowed her to turn the tables completely. She did not celebrate. She merely observed. The work was not yet over, but the balance of power had shifted entirely. She controlled the ranch. She controlled the situation. And so, as the stars began to appear in the night sky, the woman remained vigilant, her mind as sharp as ever. She had orchestrated the chaos with skill, ensuring that every move the intruders made would only reinforce her advantage. They had underestimated her, assumed her frailty, and believed they could take what was not theirs. They had been wrong. They had stepped into a storm they could not see, a force they could not match, and she, calm and precise, was ready for whatever came next. The night had settled over the ranch, thick with shadows and quiet, but the tension lingered like a living thing. The intruders, shaken and disoriented from the day's chaos, huddled together, whispering nervously. Their confidence was gone, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the soft lowing of a cow, even the faint shift of the wind, felt amplified, threatening. They had underestimated the woman they had tried to intimidate, and now they were learning far too late the consequences of that mistake. She moved silently across the property, checking her vantage points, ensuring every trap and precaution was still in place. The animals were calm, trusting her presence, unaware of the danger that had walked onto their land. She took a moment to glance at them, a soft smile crossing her face. Their safety had always been her priority, even above all else. She had fought wars where lives hung by a thread, but here, the stakes were deeply personal. This was her home, her sanctuary, and she would defend it with everything she had. From a hidden position, she watched the intruders scramble to regroup. Their confusion was complete. Some of them tried to sneak back to their vehicles, but she had already planned for that. Paths were blocked, obstacles placed, and any attempt to flee would only worsen their predicament. Panic had taken root. They were no longer acting as a unit, no longer moving with the confidence of men who believed they were in control. Each one was isolated, reacting to chaos, unaware of the calculated presence that guided every event on the ranch. She recalled the countless missions of her past, the long nights spent in wait, the endless calculations of distance, timing, and movement. Those experiences had made her an expert in strategy and observation, and now they were her advantage. The men outside could see nothing but the environment they thought they controlled. They could not see her, nor could they imagine the depth of her preparation. Every hesitation they felt, every misstep they made, confirmed what she already knew. She had the upper hand, and she would maintain it until the end. The intruders began to argue, their voices rising in frustration. One accused another of causing a mistake, while another argued that they should leave immediately. Fear made them irrational, and that was precisely what she wanted. She didn't need to confront them directly to win. The chaos she had orchestrated had already broken their morale. They were trapped in a psychological web, unaware that the very ground they walked on had been prepared to turn every small error against them. Her patience, her planning, and her calm precision had created a situation where their own fear was their greatest enemy. Then, as one man tried to move toward the barn where the horses were kept, a subtle trap she had set came into play. A gate swung open, startling the horses, and the loud noise caused the intruder to stumble and fall. The others rushed to his aid, but in doing so, they walked into other obstacles she had placed. Each reaction only deepened the disorder, each movement confirming the total control she had over the environment. They shouted, argued, and moved in a panic, completely unaware that the source of their fear remained invisible, observing every detail with cold, precise clarity. She could have taken direct action at any moment, using the skills honed over decades in military service. Every move, every shot would have been perfect. But she knew that she didn't need to rely on force alone. The intruders' fear, confusion, and overconfidence had done much of the work for her. Her strategy had been simple: make them doubt, make them falter, and let the chaos take them apart piece by piece. And it worked. One by one they were undone, not by weapons, but by their own assumptions, mistakes, and underestimation of her. As the night deepened, she moved silently among the shadows, ensuring that no one could regroup or escape without difficulty. The intruders were exhausted, their nerves frayed, and their sense of control gone. They had come expecting an easy victory, but what they found was a master strategist, someone who understood patience, timing, and the power of observation. Every moment of her preparation, every small adjustment, had brought her to this point. Complete control of a situation they had thought they dominated. She paused for a moment, listening to the faint murmurs of the frightened men, their uncertainty echoing across the ranch. There was no hatred in her actions, no desire for revenge. She had no need for unnecessary violence. Her goal had been clear from the beginning: protect her home, her animals, and her peace. The men had brought the storm themselves through their arrogance and ignorance. She had only guided them through it, a calm hand in the chaos they had created for themselves. From her vantage point, she watched as the intruders finally began to attempt retreat. Some moved toward their vehicles, only to find their paths blocked by obstacles she had placed. Simple but effective. Confusion turned to fear, fear into panic, and panic into submission. They realized, too late, that they had been completely outmatched. They had thought themselves strong, organized, and in control. Instead, they had become actors in a carefully constructed plan they could neither comprehend nor escape. By midnight, the ranch was quiet once again. The intruders had retreated in disarray, leaving behind equipment, weapons, and their confidence. The woman moved through the property, checking that the animals were unharmed, that the barriers remained secure, and that the intruders had truly left. She didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. The victory was quiet, complete, and absolute. She had defended her home without unnecessary violence, using skill, patience, and precision. The following morning, law enforcement arrived, responding to reports of disturbances and suspicious activity. They were cautious as they approached, wary of what they might find. When they arrived at the ranch, they were met with a scene of calm and order. The animals were safe, the property intact, and the evidence of the intruders' presence was clear. They were puzzled, impressed, and cautious, trying to piece together what had occurred. When they finally met her, the elderly woman who had watched over the ranch with quiet diligence, they were struck by her calm demeanor. She spoke little, offering no explanations beyond what was necessary. She allowed the scene to speak for itself, her preparation, her vigilance, and her control. The authorities, recognizing her experience and capability, did not press further. It was clear that she had handled the situation with skill and precision, far beyond what anyone could have expected. She remained a quiet figure, unassuming, almost ordinary in appearance, yet her actions spoke volumes. Her reputation, quietly earned over decades, had preceded her in action, even if not in name. In the days that followed, the ranch returned to its usual rhythm. The animals grazed peacefully. The wind rustled through the trees and the sun warmed the fields. Neighbors noticed the return of calm, the sense that everything had settled back into its natural state. There were whispers, of course, questions about what had happened, rumors of the intruders and their defeat, but she said nothing, allowing the story to remain a quiet legend, a lesson for those who underestimated strength hidden beneath a gentle exterior. She continued her routines, tending to the animals, caring for the land, and moving with the same steady grace she always had. Yet something had shifted. She knew the world could be unpredictable, dangerous, and full of people who would challenge her peace. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever came. The skills she had honed over decades, the patience, the precision, the calm strength were still hers. And in that knowledge, she found peace. The legend of the woman who defended her ranch quietly, skillfully, and without unnecessary violence spread among those who knew her story. Not many knew her name, and she preferred it that way. The tale was one of respect, caution, and recognition of strength in unexpected forms. It was a reminder that appearances could deceive, that skill and experience could outweigh brute force, and that patience and precision could be more powerful than recklessness and arrogance. As she stood on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, she reflected on the events that had unfolded. She had defended her home, her animals, and her peace. She had done so with calm, efficiency, and skill, and she had ensured that no one suffered unnecessarily. Her life had been one of discipline, patience, and strength, and even in her later years, those qualities remained as sharp as ever. The ranch, her sanctuary, remained intact, a testament to her vigilance and expertise. She knew that the world could change in an instant, that new challenges could arise, but she did not fear them. She had faced far greater dangers in her past, and she had survived. Now in her quiet life, she could continue to live with dignity, security, and peace, confident in her own strength. The intruders had learned their lesson, though they would carry it with them silently, forever aware of the woman who had outmatched them without ever needing to raise her voice. And so the ranch remained, peaceful, quiet, and safe. The woman continued her life with the same gentle determination and quiet strength that had defined her existence. She was a guardian of her land, a protector of her animals, and a reminder to the world that strength and skill could reside in the most unexpected places. Her story became a quiet legend, a testament to patience, precision, and the power of calm confidence. In the end, the ranch was not only her home but also a symbol of